Hello, everyone. The very last session for Recap 2021, but it in turn is the definition of last but not least, as we have the chieftain of the SAP developer advocates joining us from the East Coast, Americas, to actually do the most important content-wise session about the Star Wars API. Here you go, Thomas Jung, stage is yours.
All right, thanks a lot. So maybe just a little bit of background on what I want to share here today. About 6 months back or so, I wanted to create a new sample educational content, but I wanted to base it upon some content or data, an API that was a little more fun, something out of the ordinary, but also wouldn't be terribly trivial. So I went looking around for something, and I found an older educational API data model that was based upon Star Wars data. And those of you that maybe have seen my office when I don't have a virtual background up know that I have lots of fun Star Wars stuff in my office. In fact, I'm drinking my coffee from the head of a porg today. And I also thought, well, any data model that might give me the opportunity in the future to use a lightsaber live on a presentation, I can't hardly pass that up. So that's what I want to share with you today is I took this older API and re-implemented it as in the cloud application programming model. So let me go ahead and share my screen. There we go. And so let's start here with what the old model that existed out there already. So this is something not from SAP, but certainly put out here quite a few years ago as a general educational tool, and they pulled all their data from the Star Wars Wikipedia, if anybody's familiar with that. So it was all community contributed data, but it pulled data about the movies, behind the scenes information, like who was the producer and the director of each of the movies and things like that. But probably more interesting, all the data about all the characters and what planets they're from and what spaceships and other vehicles are involved and how fast each one is and how much cargo each can hold. And the original implementation, had a REST API, and the data model was basically just JSON files. So it was pretty lightweight, easy to use, and a lot of people built then additional educational models and samples on top of it. But unfortunately, it is a little out of date, although I see now somebody's been maintaining it recently in 2021. But when I looked at it originally, it hadn't been maintained in a while. And some of the data is a little outdated, like it doesn't have the newest movies. But I thought, well, this is a pretty interesting data model. It's not huge in the number of records, so it's good for educational purposes. It's already close. I mean, the original implementation was written in Python, so to convert it to the cloud application programming model seemed pretty straightforward. And when I got looking into it, the data model is pretty robust, because if we look at, like films, a single Star Wars film, inside there is a deeply nested bi-directional many-to-many relationship between all the people that are in each film and all the planets that take place in each film. So it posed a pretty interesting data modeling challenge as well, to do all these deeply nested bi-directional many-to-many relationships. And the idea was to create a Fiori UI that would let you edit all these and create new entries and things like that. Now, before I jump into showing you the code, it's all available here in SAP samples. There's a repository, Cloud CAP HANA SW API, based upon the original implementation. There's some links to the original implementation and sourcing where it came from, but also, introductory material here on the data model. And as you can see, it's a pretty complex data model when you get into it. But for now, let's go ahead and have a look at it. First of all, I've already deployed it to HANA, and although I'm going to do local development here in VS Code, I like to connect to my HANA Cloud trial as I develop and go ahead and deploy to HANA and do all my testing live against my data in HANA. So I've already connected that up. And so for instance, here, I can look at the tables in the HANA database and see, yeah, I've got Star Wars films and people and planets and stuff like that all deployed into the HANA database. And if I just go ahead and run this real quick to give you an idea of what the final output looks like, I'll let that start up. Maybe get another browser window here. Sorry, there we are. It's just behind things. As I'm sure everybody on the call or on the event today is familiar with, the endpoints of my service. But let's go ahead and look at the film entity, because there's a lot of relations coming off that. You can imagine if there's a data model for the film, then it also lists all the people that appear in all the films and all the planets, all the alien species that are involved, all the starships and things like that. And if we just look at the Fiori preview here, and maybe while this is pulling up, because it takes a few seconds the first time for your Fiori preview to load. The other thing that I wanted to do when I converted this over is I wanted to really showcase the Fiori UI with the many relationships, and I wanted nice value help on these, someone to override the default and maybe create some complex value helps as well. I wanted full CRUD with draft support. And so for instance here, like if I go ahead into Attack of the Clones and I go into edit mode, you're going to see not only do I have the ability to edit the film entity, but I've got editing capabilities to create the child entities for, I can add another person to the particular film, or my screen's a little squished up here because of the low resolution sharing, but I have the planets that take place in each of the films, the species. So this rich, deep data model, but all editable in Fiori. And I'm doing this all from the Fiori preview as well, because I wanted to do absolutely everything that I could with just Fiori annotations. So no custom UI5, all Fiori elements, all annotation based. And I also didn't want to have any JavaScript code exits or anything like that. So in fact, if we look at the project, we'll look at the data model here more in 1 second. Just the single schema CDS that has the complete data model in it, so no other database artifacts. And on the service layer side, everything's done via CDS. The only thing that I have is the server.js bootstrap. And this is only so that I can add cores, so it can be called externally, like from AppGyver or something like that. And I added the OData v2 proxy. And then I did add the logic from the help documentation on adding in the Swagger open API to the test page. But there's no actual, this is all sort of bootstrap framework messing around technical niceties, but there's no service exit handlers or anything in here. I wanted to, force myself to figure out how to do everything within the framework. And one of the first things I wanted to do is I wanted some validation on some of the input fields, and wanted to do that once again, all without, could do an exit handler and I could check values. But I wanted to really use the framework for this. So for instance, like the episode number, so we have the possible episodes of the different films. And if I actually, I'm still in change mode, we come here and put in an episode number that doesn't exist, like 16, and that's the save my draft. But when I try to send that to the back end, I should, value 16 is invalid according to the enum declaration. So I didn't have to do any coding to this. I'm using the enum functionality in the data model itself. So let me actually just cancel my draft state, go back to the way it was, set the data back correctly. But if I show you this, this was all implemented right here in the data model. And if I look at the entity, I've simply declared it as an integer, but I've added an enum on it and listed the possible values that are supported. And then if you want it validated automatically by the standard handlers, you just add the annotation assert range, and the CAP framework is automatically validating that for me. No, I don't need a like a before or after handler on that at all. The standard framework will handle that. And there's some other cool asserts that I've used in other places here, like to assert the formatting of certain fields. I've used this to like validate, well, in another example, I used it to validate email addresses or phone numbers have a certain format. And it's really nice not to have to code any of that. It's built into your data model. It's generated and enforced automatically for you by the CAP framework itself. So let's see here. I can't. Silly Zoom thing is in the way here. Sorry. So that's one thing I wanted to do. The other thing was all the relationships. Like I said, I had all these complex bi-directional many-to-many relationships. And, as I was starting to read, the different options here, and if you go to the CAP documentation, there's a great section here on modeling many-to-many relationships. And there's an interesting section here on managed composition of aspects and how they can be used for many-to-many relationships. And I thought about doing it this way, with an attributed many-to-many relationship where you have the composition of many and then an association within there. But this is really only good for unidirectional one way, and I needed to go back and forth. I needed bidirectional many-to-many. So there is a section in the help on the bidirectional many-to-many, but the trick is basically you have to build an intermediate mapping table. So for instance, I have my film entity, but when you look at the my navigation links out of this entity, for instance, for all the planets or all the characters that are in the film, it's a composition of many film to people. And this film to people is, here, let's just do a find real quick rather than navigating the small screen. If I look at this entity, I have these mapping tables that sit in between basically, and they just store the keys of the two entities that I'm connecting together. So film to people, there's a unique record for every for a particular film, and then any people that are assigned to that film, and then they just associate back to each of the entities. So it's really just a connective tissue between sets of different entities. And because I do a composition of, I'm able to manage those from the parent entity. So for instance, if I would delete a film, it would get rid of not the people records, but it would get rid of the entries in the mapping table for the film key. So all my mapping is cleaned up for me because that is a composition. So I thought that was a pretty cool modeling approach. Now the next thing besides the many bidirectional relationships is I wanted to use the IDs. I wanted to use the built-in CUID aspect to automatically put a GUID key on all my entities, but I didn't want that displaying in the user interface. If we go back there, you notice that even though this is the Fiori preview, nowhere in here do you see any of the GUIDs. I wanted to make sure that in the using annotations that I could always replace the GUID with a semantic key, which I chose to just use like the episode number of the movie as the business semantic key in this case. And that was all relatively easy to do as well using annotations. So as I annotate, say, the film entity, I use the UI text arrangement until it text only, and or I said I used the episode number, but I was wrong. I ended up using the title of the film as the business semantic key. So you're just pointing, you're just saying when you display this entity, instead of displaying the key, what you know it to be the key, which is the internally generated GUID, that doesn't really mean anything to a human being, always use the title in place of that. And then even when I use this entity as the source of value helps, it's automatically going to use the title in the display instead of that GUID behind the scenes. And nobody's ever seeing any of those nasty GUIDs, but we get the GUID, technical support behind the scenes for those GUIDs. Next, I wanted value helps, right? And I wanted a lot of value helps with fixed values. So let me show you what I mean there. For instance, let's just go back to the first screen here. Like the directors. All right, well, there are only 3 directors from the different Star Wars movies, right? But I didn't want to build a check table, a value help table, and have to populate the directors in there. I wanted that to be rather dynamic. In fact, let me go ahead and come in here. So I'm going to come to Attack of the Clones, and let's edit this. And let's go to directors. And right now I have 3 directors. But let's change the value of Attack of the Clones here. Let's say, instead of George Lucas, let's say Steven Spielberg directed that. And we'll go ahead and save that. And it's not a separate entity. It's not there's no, like I said, there's no check table, there's no value table. It's persisting that value directly back into the main entity. And there it is, it's saved. But now if I would come in here and I do the value help again, now you see Steven Spielberg is automatically added to the value help. And the little trick to do this, it's kind of, it feels like a little bit of a cheat or a hack almost. But if we look at the value help for that, what I did, I need my little helper here. Directors. I lost my. If we go to the entity, well, it's not an entity. What I did is I defined a view, but I just have it select from film the distinct values on director. And that way I always get a value help that shows me all the possible values that are there in my actual data model without having to model or enum or store that separately. And you saw as a new value gets added to my database, to my transactional data, it's automatically available in the value help the next time that it's requested, because I'm always just getting the distinct values with this view back on the main entity. And I've used this in many different places when I'm using CAP, that putting views back on the transactional data to form your value helps can be basically a nice way to handle that. And people that come from the ABAP world might be familiar with that sort of thing. The value help back on the transactional table. It's pretty easy to do. And then that view is simply, and I lost. Go back. Directors. When I have the director column in the annotations for that director attribute, I just have to add it as a value list, and the source of that value list is the view. And then I can do other things like set which is the input field and output field. On this one is pretty straightforward, but on some of the other ones, I can get more complex. For instance, I can say the in and out parameter is the episode ID, but display only, I also want to add the description. So even with these views or matching to other entities on the views, I can pull in additional columns and then get a more complex value help as well. So once again, those of you with an ABAP background are used to creating value help objects, search help objects, many of the same capabilities to do in and output mapping, display only, and put those against another table, another entity. You can accomplish all the same here with views and the set of annotations, just like I've done here. So that's my value help, what I wanted to show off there. You saw a little bit the Swagger UI, the open API functionality, and I saw that demoed in some of the other sessions as well. I really like this as well. It's cool. The fact that we can generate Swagger UI, and not only do you get the the visual representation of the data model generated dynamically off of your data model. I didn't have to build anything extra to get this. And on a fairly complex data model like what I'm working with here, this is really helpful to navigate and explain to people what the data model is like. But I love the fact that you get, the testing support of the Swagger UI. If anybody's not tried this out yet, this is really great to be able to test your service calls directly here. And in particular, not just the GET, which you can of course test from the web browser directly, but the fact that we get endpoints in the test tool. Let me, if I can collapse things up a little here. We get post and patch and delete endpoints to test with as well. So you don't need an external tool like Postman or something like that if you want to test the more complex action verbs that you can't easily do from just a web browser URL itself. Now that's standard functionality for a little while now in CAP. And for instance, what I did, yes, I put a little extra in the bootstrap as I showed you earlier, and this is all just taken right from the online help. I didn't write this, but to add the open API URLs to the CAP launch page, test page, whatever you want to call it. But I also, just in my package JSON here, what I'm doing is I added another command here. Use the CDS compile command, and you can say to open API, and then add the parameter open API diagram. That's what's going to generate those additional visualizations of your data model. And because, and then I'm just storing those in a docs folder, right? So you can come here and look at them. That creates JSON that's interpreted by the Swagger UI. But yeah, to make it easier for me, I couldn't remember all the parameters on the CDS compile. You see, I tend to do this anyway. I create scripts in my package JSON for the different commands, particularly when I've got to customize the parameters for the project that I'm working on. Like when I do my deploy to HANA, I'm using CDS deploy, but I put that in a single command. Then I can just npm run HANA or npm run open API, and I get those real handily. The last thing, one very last thing, is I wanted to convert the data that was there from the existing project, and I've got the original data from the original open source project, and it's all here in JSON. But what might be interesting to people is I wrote a standalone converter that doesn't run as part of the OData service. You can just run it from using Node.js directly. But I wrote it all using the CAP syntax and using CDL to be able to do this. And I also highly parallelized it as well to load different parts of the model in parallel. So it loads, even with a larger amount of data, loads very fast. I won't go into all the details of that because it's kind of just, you kind of got to sit and look at the code and see how we build the keys for the mapping table and stuff like that. But but yeah, that's there if you're ever wanting to look for an example of how to like mass load data into a CAP model, and you don't have CSV files and stuff like that you're going to auto load, but you want to programmatically load stuff. Hopefully this is a nice example to help out. With that, that's the end of the little walkthrough of the Star Wars data model. I hope people find it interesting and helpful.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Thomas. I've, on my part, already learned a lot and never knew that this would happen with Star Wars as a cost. So excellent. And I've never seen a lightsaber being pulled in a presentation. So double thumbs up. There were a couple of questions that I'd still like to relay to you because we're over time anyway. There's one from Benjamin Krenker. How did you load the data using generated CUIDs as foreign key of the entities?
Oh, well, that's pretty easy. Because I'm loading it with the because I'm loading it with CDL, I don't have to pre-generate the keys, and I'm passing the nested objects in directly and letting CAP generate those. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's part of the beauty of using CDL is I'm it's creating the entities, and then I only pass the entity to the child. Although for the mapping tables, yeah, I had to just generate a UUID myself and pass that in to get the parent-child relationships. But it's all here in this convert data, the last part that I showed, if you want to see how I handled the keys there.
And then there's 2 questions on value help or value lists. The first one is, right now we have to do the same common value list annotation again and again if I need the same value help in different fields, entities. E.g., need have multiple fields where I need to add an employee. Is there any way to avoid this repetition?
Well, that's why. Oh,
right. Thomas, go on, please.
Well, and maybe Daniel has a better approach, but I mean, that's part of the reason why I put the value help annotations in my data model, and I didn't put them in my service layer so that it would automatically be inherited any place that entity is used. And if I have a reusable data element and attach it as an entity, as an annotation to it, so it's inherited automatically into all the entities that use it. But right. Daniel, is there something more elegant?
Yeah, basically the same answer I would have given. The only thing is you can also create this reuse type in the data model and annotate it in a different file, and it would apply to all reuses of this type. But if you anyways only introduce it for that reason, then there's no means to also annotate it immediately. It's just like separation of concerns.
So excellent. With Daniel picking up this question, it's a perfect gateway for me to close off this session and help all of you over to the after event Zoom. Let me first and foremost say that there were a couple of really nice things happening. First of all, the learning and the insights from that we got from all of you presenters and also from the CAP core team. So thanks for being so open. Thanks for doing it all live, no strings attached. I've learned that we have an awesome speaker background, and there's a Visual Studio Code theme contest going on, obviously. So let's see who wins in the end. I'd like to thank Aidan and the broadcast team at SAP who helped us tremendously with getting this off the ground, and also to all the SAP CAP core colleagues and the community colleagues that helped organize this. So triple thumbs up and quadruple thumbs up to the presenters who were so bold and came onto this show and just did it all live. So that's as I said, quadruple thumbs up. What else can you say? Let me in the end say there is of course some small presents coming to you speakers. It's 3D printed, so to speak, as we talk right now. So it will get to you a little later. And for those of you on the other end of the globe, like York, it will take a little while longer, probably. But there's also the opportunity for you guys from the audience to still get some stickers and magnets. And the way to achieve this is send a DM via Twitter to @recapconf. That's the conference Twitter account. And then we make Danielle do the raffle. All right. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for presenting. Check out the Zoom link in the audience chat. And that's it for Recap 2021. Bye-bye.